Good morning to you from my local supermarket car park. Well, it's early in the morning, and as you can see, not many cars are here. And I was wondering how I was going to start the video this morning. I was thinking about economics. I was thinking about survival and how people are feeling at the moment, especially in the UK, because things have been turned pretty much upside down in this country over the last few weeks. And now, of course, we've about to get a new Prime Minister again. Or maybe it's an old Prime Minister, because our friend Boris Johnson is back in the running again. I was reminded actually of the scripture this morning of the Antichrist's head that gets a deadly wound and then he's revived again. I'm not saying Boris Johnson is the Antichrist, of course, but runners up. That's what comes to mind this morning. The kind of snowball rolling situation, as I was saying yesterday, how things just gather and gather and gather into larger and larger snowballs as they come down the mountain. And as these things happen, I suppose the best thing for us to do as Christians is to look up, for our redemption draws near. But we must be careful not to get afraid, not to get worried, and certainly not to be fearful. But things are getting tight. And I don't know about you, that the more often you go into the supermarket, you notice more readily the way the prices are going up and up. And we're getting towards that day in Revelation where it says I think it's a quart of wheat for a day's wages. It'll be, of course, a penny for a loaf of bread. In those days, of course, that was a day's wages. But today we're beginning to see, especially in this country, you could never pay over a pound, sterling pound, for a loaf of bread. But now, of course, that's an average price. But thought crossed my mind about the departing Prime Minister and how things went with her, and I'll share some thoughts with you back in the car and a couple of scriptures. So continuing on with the thoughts I had a moment ago, first I'd like to share a scripture with you. Luke 21:26, the words of Jesus. I'll go back up to 25 actually. Again talking about the last days. And there shall be signs in the sun, and in the moon, and in the stars, and upon the earth distress of nations, with perplexity, the sea and the waves roaring, men's hearts failing them for fear, and for looking after those things which are coming on the earth, for the powers of heaven shall be shaken. All this is prior to the coming of Jesus. And of course we're seeing it all over the earth now, aren't we? We're in our individual nations, but at the same time we have that sense, that global sense, like we've never had before. I was watching a TV show last night that my wife and I are quite fond of. It's called All Creatures Great and Small. It's the stories of James Herriot, the Yorkshire vet. Those of you that are living in Yorkshire, I once did myself, will be familiar perhaps with those stories. And it's set in 1939, and it's 2 days before the beginning of the Second World War. And you can see how farming life, very quiet farming life that people have been used to for many decades, was about to be disturbed. And in the film, the various characters, you see how war, the thoughts of war, are beginning to affect them. And the main character, his name's James Herriot, he's in turmoil because he's a vet, and he is somebody who is not meant to go out and fight, because he's required on the home front to look after the animals, which of course are going to be the food that many people, all the people are going to need through the war period. So he was essential, a key worker, you might say. That's the term I've borrowed from lockdown days, key worker. And being a key worker, he was exempt from fighting, but he felt that he had to do his duty. And you see through the program how he's torn between going out to do his duty and offer himself to sign up, and staying at home and doing the essential job he's been given. And they leave the program is left in the air. I think it was the last one in the last episode in the present series. And they leave it in the air. Will he or won't he sign on? Will he come out of the turmoil? And it just makes me think, you know, maybe there are folk out there today who, well, all of us, we see the impending signs, don't we? Signs in the sun, moon and stars, as Jesus is talking about. The perplexity of people, the perplexity of nations. And you and I have to decide, are we going to sign up fully for Jesus in these days? Are we going to, he may want us in various different places, some places perhaps less dangerous than others on the surface, but he wants us placed where he wants to place us, whether it be on the home front or on the battlefront. And Jesus is very clear here, isn't he? Distress of nations, with perplexity, the sea and the waves roaring. No peace and security. Men's hearts failing them for fear. And it says here, for looking after those things which are coming. So the more you look, the more fearful you can become. Of course, we can't help noticing. I myself noticing in the news. I haven't been a watcher of mainstream news, but I've been feeling lately that I should watch just so that I know how I can get a perspective on what's happening at the moment. And we have to look to God like never before. Yesterday I was thinking about the song, the Freddie Mercury song, and its title was Another One Bites the Dust. Those of you that are Queen fans will know the song very well. I'm not going to attempt to sing it because I'm not in Freddie Mercury's league. But another one bites the dust. Another Prime Minister in the UK goes down. And two scriptures came to mind when I was thinking about that. And they're both in Proverbs. And it's Proverbs 28:2. For the transgression of a land, many are the princes thereof, many are the rulers thereof. But by a man of understanding and knowledge, the state thereof shall be prolonged. And we're seeing exactly the opposite, aren't we? We're seeing what's happening now in this country. Many rulers. We're now having another Prime Minister. We're starting to see how understanding and knowledge are not being prolonged. Nobody knows the answer to what's actually happening. Perplexity, the roaring of the seas. People feeling agitated, irritated. How am I going to feed my family? How am I going to manage to pay my mortgage? Perplexity, fear, all coming along at once. I don't know why they got rid of Liz Truss, our Prime Minister, but thoughts crossed my mind that perhaps, although she was a globalist puppet like all the others, she wasn't enough of a globalist puppet. She wanted to reduce our energy bills by capping them, but that wasn't to be, because apparently the next person that comes in doesn't intend to do that at all. She wanted to do it for 2 years, and apparently the man who was the previous Chancellor said, no, we can't do that. We need to make sure that we don't allow any caps beyond next April. So maybe she wasn't enough of a globalist. I'm just really surmising at the moment. I don't know. I'm just bringing that in as an interjection. Because the agenda has to be followed. There has to be that 2030 agenda, and nothing's going to get in the way of it. So even by bringing back Boris Johnson, who of course was a fully fledged signed up globalist, then that would make sense to them. Proverbs 29 verse 2. We have a similar verse here on the same vein. When the righteous are in authority, the people rejoice. But when the wicked beareth rule, the people mourn. People are mourning all over the earth because the wicked are in power. Many of you, of course, in the United States will know all about that. You have a man in power who really, basically, doesn't have cognizance of the things that he's doing. He's got handlers. He's got men around him that are propping him up. And the handlers are in a way more powerful than the men that they're propping up. And this is how it is. This is how it has always been. The whisperers in the ears, the Joseph Goebbels to the Adolf Hitler. There's another scripture here that I found really interesting. Deuteronomy 28. That's verses 47 to 48. Because thou servest not the Lord thy God with joyfulness and with gladness of heart, for the abundance of all things, therefore shalt thou serve thine enemies, which the Lord shall send against thee, in hunger and in thirst and in nakedness and in want of all things. And he shall put a yoke of iron upon thy neck until he hath destroyed thee. This is the exaltation today. God says, serve me with joyfulness of heart. So as we see all these things collapsing around us, this is the heart that wants us, God wants the Lord wants us to have. To serve him with joyfulness and gladness, giving thanks for the abundance. We've had abundance in the Western world for many, many decades. We've enjoyed the fruits of our labours. We've enjoyed the building of houses, the prosperity of the nation, going into the supermarket, buying things at reasonable prices, petrol costs. I can remember the days when I first started driving, and I was living in South Africa at the time, and you could fill up your petrol tank for just a few South African rands, as the currency is there. It would have been the equivalent today of probably something like £5 just to fill up your petrol tank. We had abundance. We used to go and buy T-bone steaks and lamb. I can remember cutting up all the chops, a month's worth of meat, and putting it into the freezer, knowing that every day for that month there was going to be good food in the fridge. And of course, without that stability, without that knowledge, comes the challenge. How do we serve the Lord? But the consequences of not serving him with joy and gladness. It's a commandment, isn't it? When he says, love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, mind and soul, loving him means also realizing the abundance that he's provided for us and given to us. And saying, Lord, I thank you, even for the smallest thing that you've given me. Because in you is abundance in everything. And he goes on, doesn't he, in verse 48, therefore shalt thou serve thine enemies. Our enemies are stacking up around us. Our enemies of the gospel, enemies of the gospel that are ruling. And we don't want to serve them. We want to serve the living God with that joyful heart, that glad heart. As he says, thou shalt serve thine enemies, which the Lord shall send against thee. Sometimes the mercy of God sends us an enemy to make us wake up, to revive us, to make us see that only in him are we going to get real peace and real security. So he allows us to fall into the hands of the enemy. And that has to, of course, happen in these last days. We have to see that take place. And we have to prepare. Prepare for war, as I was saying about Herod earlier on. So he sends his enemies against us in hunger and in thirst and in nakedness. All the things that matter to us. Clothing, food, shelter. What did Paul say about clothing, food and shelter? If you just have those very basic things, be content. Be content with the basics. That's what he was saying. Not only losing all those basics, I will put that yoke of iron upon thy neck until he has destroyed thee. God can't look upon sin. He's a holy God. And that's what he calls us to in these days. But he doesn't want to put a yoke on our neck. He doesn't want to see us destroyed. He wants to see us fulfilling the life that he wants us to have. He does love us all, but he also knows that many will perish. Many will choose the other way. Many will choose to keep looking to these politicians. And maybe as the days go on, people will look to the World Economic Forum for answers. They'll say that men like Klaus Schwab and Yuval Noah Harari and Bill Gates and Elon Musk, these people have answers. Maybe there'll be successes along the way with certain medical breakthroughs. And people will say, yes, look, this is the way we should go. But God says he has a pathway for us. It's not an easy pathway, it's a narrow pathway. And time is going on. Time is in short supply. And he wants us to make decisions for him. I don't know if what's happening now in the UK is going to be a pattern for the rest of the Western world. But we're seeing the turmoil here in this nation. This was the nation that took the gospel to the world. And now we're becoming a laughing stock. And as the West becomes a laughing stock, it's the other nations outside of the West. It's the Russias and the Chinas and the Irans that will start to laugh. Will start to say, look, and point the fingers at us. So when the righteous increase, the people rejoice. But when the wicked rule, the people groan. Are we going to be groaners? Yes, we see the wicked rising up. But God has given us something precious. He's given us the gospel of Jesus Christ. And never before has there been a time when he wants us to go out in that urgency, tell people that you're standing in joyfulness, you're standing in praise, you're standing in his power, because you put your trust in him and not in prime ministers, not in rulers of the day. More and more of them will fall like dominoes, but God will keep us standing on that firm foundation. Have a blessed day.